Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Lorraine Miller, and I am the Appraisal Operations Area Manager at the Property Tax Assistance Division. Welcome to the training video regarding changes to the 2026 Electric Property Transaction Submission, or EPTS, provided by the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts Property Tax Assistance Division. In this session, we will be discussing important revisions and requirements within the EPTS. This session will also provide a refresher on submission guidelines and confidential coding information. Please make sure to take note of these changes, as compliance is essential for data integrity and accurate school district property value study results. During this presentation, we're going to cover the following topics: a summary of the revisions, submission guidelines, confidential coding information, common errors to avoid, property transaction record format, and property transaction record format edits. PTAD enhanced the common errors to avoid section of the EPTS manual to clearly explain issues typically associated with the EPTS and to support the new format edits. This section details specific issues that may cause the EPTS to be rejected. PTAD also revised the property transaction record format for the EPTS. Appendix 1 of the EPTS manual details the required fields and any associated mandatory format. There were 14 fields removed from the format and 3 additional fields that are new to the format. The largest revision to the EPTS is the property transaction record format edits. These edits are outlined in Appendix 2 of the EPTS manual and can be described as dependency checks. Similar to the EARS, PTAD will now perform edit checks on the EPTS and will reject any submission that does not meet all the requirements. Appendix 2 describes the required data for each field and identifies the dependency on information submitted in other fields. Appendix 2 also indicates the message that will accompany any rejected submission. PTAD will require all submissions be compliant with these revisions beginning January 1 of 2026. However, PTAD understands that some CADs will need at least 1 year to be compliant with some of the mandatory formats for certain fields. Therefore, PTAD will delay complete compliance for those fields until January 1 of 2027. We will discuss those specific fields and the corresponding mandatory format later in this presentation. Tax Code Section 5.07C requires appraisal districts, or CADs, to maintain the property sales information that they collect as part of their uniform record system. The CADs are required to submit the data to the Comptroller's office, where it is compiled into a statewide database. In order to ensure uniformity in the data across the CADs, the Comptroller's Property Tax Assistance Division, or PTAD, requires that all property transfers be submitted electronically in a prescribed format. The submissions are due each year on February 1 and August 1. PTAD uses this database for many purposes. It is used for the Comptroller's School District Property Value Study, or SDPVS. It is used for public information for CADs and others, and it is also used for research. PTAD uses this information to identify valid sales for the SDPVS, which estimates the total taxable value in school districts across the state. The Comptroller certifies these values to the Texas Education Agency, which uses the information in state funding calculations for each school district. To maintain the independence of the study, PTAD's appraisers will continue to collect sales information on real property from multiple listing services, real estate professionals, businesses, and property owners, in addition to the sales submitted by the CADs. Whenever possible, the SDPVS uses accurate and verified sales information rather than property appraisals because sales are more objective, efficient, and economical. The EPTS manual will provide the following information, which will all be discussed in today's presentation. It will contain the submission guidelines, confidential coding information, common errors to avoid, property transaction record format or Appendix 1, and the property transaction record format edits or Appendix 2. Submission guidelines assist PTAD in accurately identifying valid transactions for possible inclusion in the SDPBS. The guidelines also assist PTAD in identifying any non-market related transactions that should be excluded from the SDPBS. PTAD uses the EPTS files submitted primarily to generate sales survey letters about property transactions and to verify information on known sales submitted by the appraisal district. In order to accomplish both tasks, PTAD requires information on all property transactions in the possession of the CAD for the time period requested. PTAD requires ownership transfers with unknown sale prices and those determined to be valid or invalid by the CAD. PTAD will independently perform routine screening and validity checks before using sales in any analysis for purposes of the SDPBS. The time period for the required property transfers begins January 1 of the year prior to the submission date through the date of the submission. Name the file in the following format: 3-digit CAD number / EPTS and the date the file is submitted in month, day, year format. The file must be in tab delimited text or comma delimited text. PTAD can receive EPTS files via the agency FTP site. If you place a file on our FTP site, please notify us by email at ptad.sss@cpa.texas.gov. Alternatively, if the file is less than 5 megabytes in size, you may send the file as an email attachment to the same email address. The FTP site will not accept files with spaces in the file name. PTAD also requests that each submission be accompanied by a media information and certification form. This form requires the signature of the chief appraiser certifying that all property transactions are included in the submission and that each field containing confidential information has been correctly identified. The form also provides important information about the number of records and the file format. List your D-type abbreviations in the appropriate place on the form or as a separate attachment. Include the MICF with the file on the FTP site or attach it to the email. Using the accurate confidential code for each transaction ensures that PTAD is acting in accordance with the Public Information Act when submission data is requested through open records. The files that PTAD receives from each CAD are available to the public upon request in accordance with the Public Information Act. In order to make certain that PTAD is properly handling confidential information, a coding scheme was developed for Field 33, which is the confidential code. Acceptable values and the description of which field contains confidential information for Field 33 are indicated on this slide and are also located in the EPTS manual. Field 33 can contain only one of the codes listed. The field cannot be left blank and must be coded Q if the record does not contain any confidential information. For any records that are coded P for other confidential information, a list by account number indicating each field that contains confidential data and the legal provisions under which confidentiality was granted will need to be included with the submission. EPTS files containing confidential data must be encrypted before they are submitted. Many common software programs offer encryption, including WinZip and 7-Zip. This encryption is satisfactory if the password is sent to us by email. If you do not have access to any of these programs, contact PTAD to discuss possible alternatives. There are common errors that need to be avoided. Errors can result in PTAD rejecting the submission and requesting corrections. A rejection and request for correction will delay the final processing and acceptance of the submission. This delay can cause PTAD's final accepted date to be after the deadline to submit. If PTAD's final acceptance occurs after the deadline date, it will not be considered a timely submission and it may negatively impact the appraisal district. Many EPTS files are submitted with the incorrect time frame. February submissions should include all ownership transfers that have occurred since January 1 of the previous year to current. August submissions should also include all ownership transfers that have occurred since January 1 of the previous year to current. There is an overlap, and submissions will include some of the same records on each submission. It is possible that additional sales verifications have occurred and new details of transactions are available. It is important that PTAD have correct, up-to-date information. There are also numerous errors regarding the transactions included in the EPTS. Include all ownership transfers that occurred within the time frame applicable to the submission. Do not include only those transactions that have been verified and/or eliminate transactions that have been determined non-arm's length. By receiving all transactions, PTAD has the opportunity to review and analyze data and make their own determinations about the validity of transactions. Transactions listed should include only those properties that have transferred ownership. For example, do not include active listings as an indicated transfer in ownership. In addition, there should be only one transaction per ownership transfer containing all the data requested. In other words, there should not be one transaction for an account on the file with the deed information and a separate transaction for that same account with the sale price. Lastly, do not include new accounts unless they have transferred ownership. For example, new accounts created due to a replat are not included on the EPTS unless they transferred ownership. Sale prices submitted on the EPTS should reflect the actual price for which the property transferred. Lien amounts, deed of trust amounts, listing prices, etc. should not be entered in this data field as they do not reflect the actual sale price or market value. It should be noted that while deed of trust amounts are not considered valid sale prices for the study, if they are erroneously submitted, they are considered an indicated sale for purposes of the alternate test. The alternate test is performed in compliance with Government Code Section 403-302, which requires the Comptroller's Office to ensure that different levels of appraisal on sold and unsold property do not adversely affect the accuracy of the study. CADs that use lien amounts and listing prices to develop local appraisal schedules should not include these amounts as sale prices on the EPTS. Files have also been received with confidentiality coded as yes, no, or unknown. PTAD is not authorized to change or correct the confidentiality coding, and our system requires that the appropriate confidential codes be submitted. Also, please remember that the confidentiality code P requires an explanation of what is confidential and why. Most data fields are mandatory and may not be blank. The property transaction record format table located in the EPTS manual indicates the mandatory data fields with instructions to not leave the field blank. Verify that all mandatory fields have the required data. Some data fields have a mandatory formatting requirement. The property transaction record format table indicates the mandatory format requirements. The most recent CAD value must be submitted. Specifically, the August submission must contain the current year certified market values. In addition, the value indicated is the market value, not the taxable value. For example, the land value reflected for D1 accounts should be the market value, not the ag value. Appendix 1 of the EPTS manual contains the required property transaction record format. This appendix will detail the required fields and indicate if a field may be left blank. Appendix 1 will also indicate if there is a mandatory format for a specific field and provide an example. There are now 52 required fields. The old format contains 63. I will discuss the details of what has changed in this presentation. Most fields require information, but there are 17 fields that may be blank. However, most of these fields will have dependency checks per Appendix 2, the property transaction record format edits. Detailed information regarding Appendix 2 will be discussed later. There are 15 fields that require a mandatory format. We will look at those fields and the examples in detail later in this presentation. The 14 fields removed from the format were determined to be unnecessary for purposes of the EPTS. Most of these details are either unnecessary for sales verification or typically unknown by the CAD. The fields removed are the parcel zip code, sale price apportion confirmation, overlapping property indicator, total exempt code, map number, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, central heat and air confirmation, construction type and or class, number of stories, subdivision neighborhood, market area code, interest rate, number of years financed, and down payment. Many of these fields were consistently left blank, so were determined to be ineffective. There are 3 new fields that will be required on the EPTS. They are additional accounts in the transaction, percent ownership, and current year percent complete. Historically, the additional accounts were identified in the CAD comments field of the EPTS. However, there were numerous instances when the additional accounts in a transaction were not identified at all. This new field may only be blank if the multiple account code field is in, indicating there are no additional accounts involved in the transfer. There will be a dependency check as outlined in Appendix 2. The additional accounts in the transaction field assist PTAD in identifying all accounts involved in a specific sale or transfer. The percent ownership field is a required field that may not be left blank. The field also has a mandatory format that will be discussed later. The current year percent complete is also a required field that may not be left blank. The field also has a mandatory format that we'll discuss later. Both the percent ownership and percent complete fields assist PTAD in the identification of valid sales and the verification process. There are 17 fields that may be blank on the EPTS. However, 12 of those fields will have dependency checks that are outlined in Appendix 2. There are 5 fields that may be blank and have no dependencies on other information. Many CADs do not utilize the sale date field and rely solely on the deed date. For this reason, the sale date may be blank. However, the deed date may not be blank. All transfers indicated on the EPTS must have a corresponding deed date. If there is an indicated sale date, a sale price must be entered in the sale price field. The financing code and number of days on market fields may both be blank and do not have any dependency checks. PTAD recognizes this information may not be readily available to the CAD. In addition, the CAD comments fields may also be blank and do not have any dependency checks. As in the past, the CAD comments offer two fields for the CAD to submit any additional comments or notes they may feel are relevant to the transfer. These fields are identified as CAD comments line 1 and CAD comments line 2. Historically, these fields were used to identify additional accounts in a transaction. However, there is a new field for that information as indicated earlier. There are 12 fields that may be blank but will have dependency checks. Deed volume, deed page, deed number, additional accounts and transaction, grantee first name, grantee last name, grantee address line 2, grantor first name, grantor last name, grantor address line 2, CAD sales source code, and validity code fields may all be blank depending on other information provided in other fields. For example, deed volume and deed page may be blank as long as deed number is not blank. All transactions indicated on the EPTS are required to have a corresponding instrument number that transferred ownership. If the multiple account code field indicates there are multiple accounts included in the transfer, the additional accounts in transaction field may not be blank. The additional accounts included must be identified in this field. If the grantee first name is blank, the grantee last name may not be blank. All transactions must have a corresponding grantee or buyer. If grantor last name is blank, grantor first name may not be blank. All transactions must also have a corresponding grantor or seller. Both the grantee and grantor's address line 2 may be blank if the mailing address is identified in address line 1. If the sale price field is greater than 0, the CAD sales source code and validity code may not be blank. Any sale price submitted on the EPTS will have a corresponding CAD source code and a validity determination. The remaining 35 fields of the EPTS may not be blank. Blank fields will cause PTAD to reject the submission. As stated previously, a rejection could delay the final processing and acceptance of the submission. This delay can cause PTAD's final accepted date to be after the deadline to submit and may not be considered a timely submission. There are circumstances, such as percent complete, when data is not applicable. Appendix 1 describes if there is no improvement, the percent complete field will be 0. Likewise, if there is no improvement, the square footage and year built will be 0. Common fields that have been blank in the past that can cause a submission to be rejected are deed type, square footage, year built, land unit type, number of land units, previous CAD land value, and previous CAD improvement value. There are 15 fields that require a specific mandatory format. The CAD code and school district code must be the numeric identification code as assigned by the Comptroller's Property Tax Assistance Division for each transaction. The CAD code is a 3-digit number and the ISD code is a 6-digit number. Each transaction must have an identified category code used by PTAD for the property's use. If the CAD uses a different category code, they must be translated to one used by PTAD that best fits the property. For example, if the CAD uses C3 for vacant lots in a specific location, they must be converted to C1. The list used by PTAD is available in Appendix 1. Sale date and deed date must be in 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and 4-digit year format. The fields designated for multiple accounts, frozen characteristics, and values set by ARB all require Y for yes or N for no. The field designated for validity indication requires Y for yes, N for no, or U for unknown. The confidential code field requires a specific code as outlined in the EPTS manual. The most recent appraisal year field must be the current year the submission is filed, and the values submitted must correspond to the current year. The percent ownership field must be expressed as a decimal, and the current year percent complete must be expressed as a whole number. The most extensive revisions regarding EPTS mandatory formats are the CAD sales source code and the land unit type fields. Both of these fields will now require a specific format as outlined in the EPTS manual. PTAD will now require the EPTS to identify the CAD sales source code for any transfer where there is a submitted sale price using one of the following abbreviations. APP will indicate the sale price was obtained from a local appraiser. BUY will indicate the sale price was obtained from the property buyer. SEL will indicate the sale price was obtained from the property seller. AGT will indicate the sale price was obtained from a real estate agent or tax agent. SER will indicate the sale price was obtained from subscription service data sources, such as but not limited to MLS, CoStar, and TransUnion. INT will indicate the sale price was obtained from internet sources, such as but not limited to Zillow and Redfin. PTAD will also require the EPTS to identify the method of appraisal used to estimate land value using one of the following abbreviations. SF will indicate the per square foot method was used. AC will indicate the per acre method was used. FF will indicate the per front foot method was used. FB will indicate the land has been flat valued or a per site value was used. NA will indicate that it is not applicable and that there is no land value. PTAD recognizes that it may take at least 1 year for the CADs to comply with these two mandatory formats. Therefore, if a submission is rejected based on this criteria only, it will not be considered late until the February 2027 submission deadline. There are 65 format edits for the EPTS. The edits are clearly outlined in Appendix 2 of the EPTS manual. We will briefly review some of the common issues and the new requirements. The legal description and parcel address must not be blank or all zeros. If there's an indicated transfer that does not contain a legal description or a parcel address, the submission will be rejected. If the sale date contains a valid date, the sale price must be greater than 0. The deed date must not be blank and must contain a valid date. This date must correspond with the submission's required date range. There must be a deed volume and page, a deed number. There must be a deed type. Multiple account code field must be a Y or an N. And if the multiple account code is Y for yes, there must be account numbers indicated in the additional accounts and transaction field. There must be a grantee first name or a grantee last name or business name. There must be a grantor first name or grantor last name or business name. If the sale price is greater than 0, the CAD sales source code must be APP, BUY, SEL, AGT, SER, or INT. All transactions must have an appropriate confidential source code as described in the EPTS manual. Most recent appraisal year must be the current year of the submission. The February submissions will contain the current value of each account. The August submission will contain the current year's certified value of each account. Percent ownership must be greater than 0. If the CAD improvement value is greater than 0, the percent complete field must be greater than 0. If the CAD improvement value is greater than 0, the year built field must be greater than the year 1500 and less than or equal to the current year. If the land value is greater than 0, land unit type must be equal to SF, AC, FF, or FV. The revised manual is available on our website, and for assistance regarding the FTP site or records layout or text file naming, contact Les Adam at 512-305-9920 or leslie.adam@cpa.texas.gov or Steve Rothstein at 512-936-8546 or Stephen.Rothstein@cpa.texas.gov. Thank you all for attending today's EPTS webinar. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at the email addresses listed.